Welcome back to Room 57, the place where we dive deep into the most compelling, insightful, and current real-life stories. In each video, we bring detailed analyses of high-profile cases, shocking events, and stories that change the world. Around us today, we will explore a case that shocked not only America, but the entire world. The Gabby Petito murder case. This case became one of the most talked about stories in 2021, not just because of the tragic nature of the event, but also due to the role social media and the press played in bringing attention to it. Gabby Petito's disappearance and the subsequent investigation have made this case one of the most prominent examples of domestic violence, relationship control, and how victims of abuse are often overlooked in society. So, what is the story behind Gabby Petito? What events unfolded in her life? And can we learn anything from this case to prevent similar tragedies in the future? Stay tuned as we break down the case, the controversial details, and its long-term impact on society. Introduction to the Gabby Petito case. Gabby Petito, a 22-year-old woman from Long Island, New York, planned a cross-country road trip with her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie, during the summer of 2021. Gabby, a travel blogger, shared her journey on social media, showcasing her adventures. However, after posting on Instagram on August 25, 2021, Gabby lost contact with her family. By the end of September, Gabby's body was discovered in Grand Teton National Park, Wyoming. The case quickly became a media sensation as Brian Laundrie, her boyfriend and the last person with her, went missing and became the prime suspect. The case raised significant questions about their relationship and highlighted serious issues of domestic violence and victim protection. Part 1. The Gabby Petito case, a dream turned tragic. 1.1. The beginning of a dream journey. Gabby Petito was a 22-year-old woman from Blue Point, Long Island, New York, known for her bubbly personality and love for adventure. She had a passion for traveling, photography, and sharing her experiences with the world. Gabby's vibrant social media presence reflected her love for nature, the outdoors, and the freedom of exploring new places. Her journey into the public eye came through her Instagram, where she shared pictures of breathtaking landscapes, road trips, and personal moments. Alongside her dreams of living a life on the road, Gabby's dream began to unfold in July 2021, when she and her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie, set out on a cross-country road trip. The pair had planned to travel across the United States, visiting national parks, camping, and documenting their travels for Gabby's social media followers. Gabby had hoped the trip would be both an opportunity for personal growth and a way to share her adventures with her growing audience. She had big plans for the trip, as she was in the process of developing a brand around her van life journey, living and traveling in a van. The road trip would allow her to see the natural wonders of the United States, as she made sure to capture every moment. Gabby posted updates regularly on her social media accounts, especially Instagram, where she shared images and videos of her travels. But behind the scenic images and cheerful captions, there were tensions within her relationship with Brian Laundrie, tensions that would eventually turn deadly. While Gabby and Brian seemed to be living out a fairy tale on social media, their personal lives were filled with the stress of an unstable relationship, a pattern that would tragically escalate during their travels. 1.2. The growing concern. The signs of trouble. As Gabby and Brian continued their journey through the United States, Gabby's family began to notice a shift. The frequent updates that had once been filled with excitement and joy began to taper off. Gabby's final Instagram post appeared on August 25, 2021, but there were no further communications. This silence was out of character for Gabby, who had always kept in regular contact with her family. The last image Gabby shared was a photograph from Monument Rocks in Kansas, posted along with a caption that appeared to show a joyful moment. However, her family soon became concerned when no further updates were shared and their attempts to reach her were met with silence. They began to worry, but they held out hope, thinking that perhaps Gabby was simply disconnected from her phone or had gotten caught up in the beauty of nature. On August 30, 2021, Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, made a post on Facebook urging anyone who had seen or heard from Gabby to reach out. This marked the beginning of the growing concern from the Petito family and their awareness that something was terribly wrong. Gabby's parents had been in regular contact with her during her travels, and her silence became an alarm bell that couldn't be ignored. The distress was heightened by the fact that Brian had returned to his home in Florida alone on September 1, 2021, without Gabby. The circumstances surrounding Brian's return were strange. He had driven the van that the couple had been traveling in, but offered no explanation about Gabby's whereabouts. Brian's return without Gabby, coupled with the lack of communication from her, raised immediate suspicions among Gabby's family. But when Brian remained silent, refusing to share any details about Gabby's disappearance, the alarm bells rang even louder. Gabby's family contacted authorities, and soon, the case took a much darker turn. 1.3. the investigation begins. The search for Gabby as Gabby's family frantically worked to get answers. They began to reach out to law enforcement. They were desperate for any information about her whereabouts, and local police soon got involved. However, the investigation took time to gain traction. Initially, authorities treated Gabby's disappearance as a missing persons case, which, unfortunately, is a process that often lacks urgency until further evidence is found. The FBI soon became involved, expanding the search for Gabby across the country. But as the search grew, it was clear that the case had gained national attention. The increasing media coverage, coupled with growing public interest, pressured law enforcement to speed up the investigation and pursue all possible leads. In the meantime, Brian Laundrie remained silent, refusing to speak to the police or Gabby's family about her whereabouts. His refusal to cooperate was troubling to investigators, as it was becoming increasingly apparent that Brian had the last known contact with Gabby. Brian's lack of communication and his sudden disappearance only fueled suspicion, and suspicion led to further speculation that he might know more about Gabby's fate than he had let on. Public attention to the case skyrocketed, especially after the release of body cam footage from a police stop between Gabby and Brian in Moab, Utah, on August 12, 2021. The body cam footage showed a visibly upset Gabby and Brian involved in a tense argument. The police had pulled the couple over after receiving reports of a domestic dispute. Gabby appeared distressed, stating that she had been experiencing anxiety and stress, which led to the altercation. The footage raised serious questions about the nature of Gabby's relationship with Brian. The police interaction highlighted warning signs that Gabby might have been in an abusive relationship, and it made the public question whether the couple's troubles were more serious than just a simple argument. The video was released to the public, and the narrative began to shift from a missing persons case to a possible domestic violence situation. 1.4 The discovery of Gabby's body in September 19, 2021. Nearly a month after Gabby's disappearance, her body was discovered in Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, just a few miles from where she had last been seen. The discovery of her remains was a tragic and heartbreaking moment for her family, who had been holding out hope that she would be found alive. The discovery quickly led authorities to confirm that Gabby had been murdered, with the cause of death officially ruled as homicide by blunt force trauma. Gabby's family was devastated by the loss, but they were also determined to get justice. For her, they released public statements, calling for Brian Laundrie to be arrested and brought to trial for his role in Gabby's death. The discovery of Gabby's body shifted the investigation into a homicide investigation, and it became clear that Brian Laundrie was the key suspect in the case. Meanwhile, Brian Laundrie had gone missing, and authorities launched a nationwide search for him. The public suspicions grew as details about Brian's behavior during the investigation were revealed. The Laundrie family's reluctance to cooperate with authorities, and the fact that Brian was on the run, only deepened the mystery of Gabby's death. 1.5 The search for Brian Laundrie and the growing public pressure as authorities intensified their search for Brian Laundrie. The public's pressure on law enforcement to act swiftly only grew. The media spotlighted Laundrie's silence, and his disappearance only raised further questions about his involvement in Gabby's death. The FBI conducted a large-scale search across the country, and the story captivated people around the world. On October 20, 2021, Brian Laundrie's remains were discovered in a nature reserve near his home in Florida, close to the area where he had been last seen. His cause of death was determined to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This revelation brought an end to the investigation into his whereabouts, but it left many questions unanswered. The fact that Brian had chosen to end his life meant that he would never be held accountable in a court of law for Gabby's death. Many people expressed frustration that justice for Gabby would never be fully served, because Brian's actions had prevented a proper trial. Conclusion of Part 1. The story of Gabby Petito is a tragic one, marked by her dreams of adventure and a life of discovery that ended in violence and heartbreak. While the investigation into her death has led to some answers, many questions remain. Gabby's case has sparked a conversation about domestic violence, abusive relationships, and the need for stronger protections for victims. The public's outcry, the investigation's complexity, and the eventual revelations about Brian Laundrie's role in her death have left an indelible mark on society. The tragic death of Gabby Petito continues to serve as a reminder of the dangers of domestic abuse and the importance of speaking out when something doesn't feel right in a relationship. Gabby's family's commitment to justice and their efforts to raise awareness about domestic violence have turned her story into one of courage and a call for change. We owe it to Gabby to ensure that her story does not fade into the past without lasting change. Part 2. The investigation and legal aftermath of the Gabby Petito case. To point 1. The launch of the investigation's discovery of Gabby Petito's body on September 19, 2021, confirmed the worst fears of her family. The young woman who had captured the hearts of millions through her social media posts was dead. The initial investigations had begun as a missing persons case, but as soon as her remains were found, it turned into a homicide investigation. Gabby's parents, Nicole Schmidt and Joseph Petito, along with their supporters, hoped for justice, but they were also deeply distraught by the brutal nature of her death. The FBI was quickly called in to assist with the investigation. They interviewed Gabby's family, friends, and acquaintances, trying to piece together the timeline leading up to her disappearance. They also started gathering evidence from her phone, social media accounts, and digital records to understand what had happened during her travels with Brian Laundrie, her fiancé, who had returned to his home in Florida without her. The FBI's investigation focused heavily on Brian Laundrie, who was now the prime suspect in the case. His behavior had raised red flags from the moment he returned to Florida without Gabby, and his refusal to cooperate with investigators only made him look more suspicious. The case quickly became more complicated as details about his actions before and after Gabby's disappearance came to light. A search for Brian Laundrie after the discovery of Gabby's body. The search for Brian Laundrie became a nationwide pursuit. On September 17, 2021, 2 weeks after Brian returned home without Gabby, he went missing. He had told his parents that he was going to the Carlton Reserve, a wildlife area near his home in North Port, Florida, but he did not return. His disappearance was seen as suspicious, especially since he had been the last person known to have been with Gabby during her travels. Authorities, along with the FBI, launched a massive search effort to locate Brian. The search focused on areas near the Carlton Reserve, where Brian's parents claimed he had gone hiking. However, days turned into weeks, and the investigation took a darker turn when it became clear that Brian Laundrie was intentionally evading law enforcement. Brian's family had refused to fully cooperate with the investigation, and it quickly became evident that they might have been protecting him. Media coverage of the case intensified, and public pressure mounted on law enforcement to find Brian and bring him to justice. Speculation ran wild, with some people questioning whether Brian was being sheltered by his family or whether they were simply too afraid to speak out. During this time, new information came to light, including the body cam footage of an interaction between Gabby and Brian, captured on August 12, 2021, by Moab, Utah, police. The footage showed an emotional Gabby in tears, talking about her struggles with anxiety and how it had affected her relationship with Brian. The couple had been stopped by the police after a witness reported a possible domestic dispute between them. This video was crucial in shedding light on the tension in their relationship and raised concerns about possible domestic abuse. 3. The impact of social media and public outrage as news of Gabby's death spread. Social media became a platform for people to express their outrage and demand justice. The hashtag Justice for Gabby gained traction, and people around the world rallied behind her family's calls for answers. The case dominated the news cycle. With daily updates and ongoing coverage of the search for Brian, Gabby's story resonated with many people, particularly with those who had experienced or witnessed domestic abuse. Her case brought attention to the warning signs of abusive relationships and the lack of support for victims. The emotional distress that Gabby had expressed in the body cam footage, along with the signs of manipulation and control by Brian, painted a troubling picture of their relationship. The widespread attention to Gabby's case also highlighted the role that social media plays in modern investigations. Gabby had been an active social media user, sharing her journey with her followers, and the public's familiarity with her posts made her case even more personal. The online community took it upon themselves to dig into Brian's background and share information, creating a digital army of people determined to see justice served. While the power of social media in bringing attention to the case was undeniable, it also led to the spread of misinformation and speculation. As more details about the case came out, various online theories emerged, many of which were unverified or exaggerated. This created confusion, but it also underscored the extent to which the public had become invested in the case. 4. The role of law enforcement and the investigation's challenge. As the investigation into Gabby's death faced several challenges, particularly due to Brian's refusal to cooperate and the lack of concrete evidence about his whereabouts. Law enforcement officials, while working tirelessly to track him down, were frustrated by the obstacles they faced. Many questioned how Brian had been able to evade capture for so long, especially given the level of public and media attention on the case. The search for Brian was complicated further by the Laundrie family's actions. On September 17th, when Brian went missing, his family waited several days before informing the authorities. This delay, along with the refusal to fully cooperate with investigators, raised suspicions about whether they were concealing information. In some ways, the Laundrie family's actions, or lack thereof, became just as controversial as the case itself. As time passed, the FBI and local law enforcement continued their efforts to locate Brian. The national manhunt became one of the most talked about aspects of the case, with many people expressing frustration that Brian had not yet been found. Public pressure to find Brian grew, and the investigation seemed to be at a standstill. 5. Brian Laundrie's final days and discovery of his remains on October 20, 2021. A major breakthrough occurred in the search for Brian. Brian Laundrie's remains were found in a nature reserve near his family's home in Florida, the very area he had been reportedly last seen. The discovery of his body marked the end of the nationwide search, but left many unanswered questions. An initial autopsy revealed that Brian Laundrie died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This discovery immediately ended the search for him, but it also meant that he would never face trial for his role in Gabby's death. While the cause of death was confirmed as suicide, it raised several important questions about the investigation and the role Brian had played in Gabby's tragic fate. Brian's death meant that Gabby's family would never get the chance to have closure through a trial. They would never have the opportunity to hear Brian's side of the story in court. It also meant that any potential accomplices or further details about the circumstances surrounding Gabby's death would remain unknown. While many people were relieved that Brian was no longer a fugitive, others felt that his suicide robbed them of the full justice process. The investigation into his death was closed, and his role in Gabby's murder was confirmed by his actions and the evidence gathered during the investigation. 6. The legal and social repercussions. What happens now? The legal aftermath of the case saw an outpouring of support for Gabby's family. Many people expressed their anger over the way the case had been handled, particularly with the delays in reporting Brian's disappearance and the family's failure to fully cooperate with investigators. The fact that Gabby's death was the result of a domestic violence situation also led to a renewed focus on domestic violence awareness and the need for greater protections for victims. Gabby's case sparked a nationwide conversation about domestic violence, abusive relationships, and the need for stronger legal protections for victims. Her story was one of many, but it became a rallying point for people who had experienced or witnessed similar forms of abuse. The public demanded change, pushing for better laws to prevent domestic violence, greater accountability for abusers, and better resources for victims. The tragedy of Gabby Petito's death has also left a lasting impact on law enforcement and the justice system. It has raised questions about how authorities handle cases of missing persons, especially in situations involving potential domestic violence. Many believe that Gabby's case highlighted the need for better training for law enforcement on how to handle domestic abuse cases, especially those involving young women in relationships with potential abusers. Conclusion: a part to the Gabby Petito case has become a pivotal moment in the ongoing discussion about domestic violence and the failures of law enforcement to protect vulnerable individuals in abusive relationships. The case has made it painfully clear that domestic abuse is often hidden in plain sight, and it calls for a much-needed overhaul in the way such cases are handled. Gabby's story has shown a light on the dark side of relationships that might appear perfect on the outside, but are toxic and dangerous beneath the surface. While the case itself may be officially closed with Brian Laundrie's death, the fight for justice for Gabby Petito is far from over. It serves as a reminder that we all have a responsibility to speak up for victims, to recognize the warning signs of abuse, and to demand better protections for those at risk. As we move forward, we must continue to honor Gabby's memory by pushing for change in society and the justice system to ensure that no more lives are lost to domestic violence. Part 3. The public outcry and the call for change after Gabby Petito's death. 3.1. The global response to Gabby's death. Tragic death of Gabby Petito stirred deep emotional responses from millions of people around the world. From the moment her remains were found, social media exploded with expressions of grief, outrage, and a call for justice. The widespread media coverage of the case amplified the public's need for answers and highlighted the profound impact that the case had on society, especially those affected by domestic violence. The case touched a nerve because it highlighted the prevalence of domestic violence and abuse in relationships, an issue that often remains hidden behind closed doors. Gabby's story, while uniquely heartbreaking, was not isolated. Numerous women across the world face similar struggles every day, many of whom are not given the same attention or outpouring of support. Gabby became a symbol of the millions of women and men who suffer in silence, enduring emotional, psychological, and physical abuse. Gabby's family was at the center of this public outcry. Her parents, Nicole Schmidt and Joseph Petito, became strong advocates for justice, not just for their daughter, but for all victims of domestic violence. They continuously pushed for legal reforms, calling for action that would prevent future tragedies like this from occurring. Gabby's death became a rallying cry, one that ignited a broader conversation about abuse, victim blaming, and the need for systemic change. 3.2. The rise of #JusticeForGabby and the power of social media. #JusticeForGabby movement quickly gained momentum across social media platforms, becoming a powerful force in bringing attention to Gabby's case. People from all walks of life began sharing their support for her family, creating a collective voice for those seeking justice and change. The hashtag went viral, showing how the internet and social media can mobilize people around a common cause. While the investigation into her death had begun as a law enforcement matter, the overwhelming response from the public on social media elevated the case to new heights. The way the public engaged in the case was a reflection of how much Gabby's story resonated. She was no longer just a victim of violence. She became a representative of all those who feel powerless in abusive relationships. Moreover, the case underscored the important role of digital activism. Gabby had used social media as a tool for self-expression in sharing her life, and in her death, the same platforms were used to bring justice to her memory. Supporters used social media to organize virtual protests, create awareness about the issue of domestic violence, and demand that authorities bring Brian Laundrie to justice. The mobilization of people online became a direct channel for pushing law enforcement agencies to act swiftly and efficiently. 3.3 The role of the media in shaping the narrative. Media's coverage of Gabby's disappearance and death was instrumental in the public's engagement with the case. From the moment Gabby's parents called for help, the media was there to cover the search, the findings, and the growing public outcry. However, the media's role was not without controversy. There were those who believed that Gabby's case received disproportionate attention compared to other missing persons cases, particularly those involving people of color or marginalized communities. Critics argued that the extensive media coverage of Gabby's case highlighted the disparities in coverage and the implicit biases that persist in missing persons reporting. On the other hand, the focus on Gabby's case also shone a light on the lack of attention given to missing persons, especially women in violent or abusive relationships. The fact that the world paid attention to Gabby's disappearance was indicative of how deeply the case resonated with the public. Many argued that the widespread coverage of her case should be a wake-up call for media outlets to focus more on stories of domestic violence and abuse, particularly when victims are unable to speak for themselves. The media's role extended beyond simply covering the case. It also shaped the way people understood the dangers of toxic relationships. The body cam footage released by Moab Police Department, showing Gabby and Brian in a domestic dispute, became a pivotal moment in the case. Gabby's emotional distress in the footage prompted viewers to examine the signs of emotional abuse and controlling behavior in relationships. The footage led to a deeper conversation about how relationship dynamics can be abusive, even before physical violence occurs. 3.4 The legal and legislative push for changes. Gabby's case continued to unfold. It became clear that the public wanted more than just justice. For her death, they wanted to see systemic change. Gabby's case became a pivotal moment for the conversation around domestic violence laws, victim rights, and the accountability of law enforcement in responding to such situations. Gabby's parents, especially her mother Nicole Schmidt, began speaking out in support of legislative reforms that would help prevent future tragedies. One of the key areas that sparked reform discussions was the handling of missing persons cases. Many advocates argued that the initial response to Gabby's disappearance had been slow and inefficient. Had the authorities acted faster, would Gabby still be alive today? The lack of a sense of urgency in the initial days after her disappearance prompted the public to call for changes to the police response to missing persons, particularly in cases that involve potential domestic violence. Lawmakers across the country began discussing how domestic violence cases are handled, especially when they involve young women in abusive relationships. Some proposed stronger laws to protect victims of domestic violence and to make it easier for them to leave abusive situations. Additionally, better training for law enforcement officers was suggested so they could recognize the signs of abuse more effectively and act with greater urgency when responding to such situations. The Gabby Petito Foundation was founded by her family in the aftermath of her death to help advocate for victims of domestic violence, provide resources for families of missing persons, and support ongoing investigations into similar cases. The foundation aims to provide support to people in abusive relationships and raise awareness about the importance of early intervention in domestic violence situations. Gabby's parents' advocacy for this cause has kept her memory alive while working to prevent future tragedies. 3.5 Domestic violence awareness and education. A call to act. Gabby's death served as a harsh reminder of the prevalence of domestic violence in intimate relationships. While public awareness of domestic violence has increased in recent years, Gabby's case further exposed the need for stronger educational programs aimed at identifying and addressing relationship abuse. Many survivors of domestic violence do not reach out for help until it is too late. often because they are manipulated, isolated, or unaware of the resources available to them. One of the critical points that arose from Gabby's case was the need for better education on the signs of abusive relationships. Domestic violence is not always physical, it can be emotional, psychological, and financial as well. Gabby's case highlighted how controlling behavior and gaslighting can slowly manipulate a victim's reality, leading them to believe they are at fault for the abuse. The public's reaction to the case led many to call for education programs that teach individuals how to recognize these signs early on, in the hopes of preventing further abuse. Furthermore, bystander intervention was a concept that gained traction in the wake of Gabby's story. Many individuals who witnessed domestic violence incidents, such as the police officers who stopped Gabby and Brian in Moab, may not realize the full extent of the situation. Education on how to intervene safely and effectively in situations where abuse is suspected could save lives. Gabby's case called for societal change not only at the legislative level, but also at the grassroots level, where individuals can have the power to act and protect their friends, family, and loved ones from abuse. 3.6. The enduring legacy of Gabby Petito's story. Gabby Petito's story will remain a legacy in the fight against domestic violence, both in America and internationally. It has sparked conversations about victim advocacy, mental health, and relationship dynamics. Gabby's parents have used their grief to fuel a movement for justice and change, and they continue to work towards ensuring that no one else has to suffer in silence like Gabby did. Her case has made it clear that society must do more to protect vulnerable individuals, especially those in abusive relationships. The hashtag Justice for Gabby movement is a testament to the power of public outcry in bringing about change. While Gabby may no longer be here, her legacy lives on in the work that continues to raise awareness about domestic violence and protect victims who are too often overlooked. The case will forever be a reminder that no one should ever have to endure abuse in silence, and the fight for justice doesn't end when the case is closed, it only begins. Conclusion of Part 3. The death of Gabby Petito triggered a profound societal shift, forcing both the public and lawmakers to confront the ugly truths of domestic violence and the systemic failures that allow it to persist. Gabby's case has pushed forward the conversation about victim protection, domestic violence education, and police responsibility. Her story has mobilized people to take action, to ensure that others who suffer from domestic violence are not forgotten, and to demand the changes necessary to prevent such tragedies in the future. Gabby's memory lives on through the advocacy and reforms that have followed her death. By honoring her legacy, we can continue the fight to protect those who are vulnerable, to educate those who are at risk, and to hold those who perpetuate violence accountable. Part 4. The legal and societal impact of the Gabby Petito case. For point 1. The legal implications of the Gabby Petito case. Gabby Petito case not only sparked widespread emotional reactions, but also had profound implications for the legal system, particularly in the realm of domestic violence and missing persons investigations. Gabby's tragic death underscored the importance of effective law enforcement protocols, the role of the legal system in protecting victims, and the need for better victim support systems. As the investigation unfolded, several key legal and procedural questions arose, from how law enforcement responded to Gabby's disappearance to the ongoing legal actions after the discovery of her body. For 1.1, the response from law enforcement. Gabby's case highlighted the complexities of investigating a missing person case, especially when potential domestic violence is involved. The initial police response was criticized by some, particularly in light of the fact that Brian Laundrie, her fiancé, was the last known person to be with her. While the case was treated as a missing persons investigation at first, there were calls for a more immediate investigation into the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, especially after the body cam footage from the Moab Police Department surfaced. In August 2021, a domestic dispute between Gabby and Brian was recorded by Moab police. In the footage, Gabby was visibly upset, expressing her anxieties and describing an emotional breakdown, while Brian appeared calm. The police, after questioning both individuals, separated them for the night, though no charges were filed. Critics argued that this was an opportunity to investigate the relationship more deeply, especially considering the early signs of domestic tension and emotional abuse that were visible in the body cam footage. Many believe that had the officers acted differently or dug deeper, Gabby's situation might have been recognized for what it truly was: an abusive and potentially dangerous relationship. Furthermore, law enforcement's delay in acting immediately after Brian Laundrie returned home without Gabby raised additional concerns. When he arrived in Florida without her, he did not provide any explanation about her whereabouts. His refusal to cooperate with authorities meant that they were left with few options to pursue the investigation. Law enforcement's hesitation to publicly name him a person of interest only fueled the frustration of Gabby's family, who felt that Brian was being protected. For .1.2, Brian Laundrie's role and the absence of legal accountability. Legal consequences of Brian Laundrie's actions have remained a topic of debate throughout the investigation. As the prime suspect in Gabby's death, the expectation was that he would eventually face charges. However, after his disappearance in September 2021 and the subsequent discovery of his remains in October 2021, justice for Gabby was left incomplete. The fact that Brian Laundrie died by suicide before he could stand trial for his alleged role in Gabby's murder left a sense of unfinished justice for many people. The FBI and other investigators had collected significant evidence that suggested Brian was involved in Gabby's death, including his suspicious return to Florida without her and the discovery of her remains. However, his refusal to cooperate with authorities meant that the full extent of the events surrounding Gabby's death would never be known. The lack of legal accountability for Brian was deeply unsatisfying for many, especially Gabby's family, who had hoped for a court case where they could present their evidence and seek a fair trial. The fact that he died before facing charges raised questions about the limits of the legal system in addressing cases of suspected domestic violence and abuse, particularly when the perpetrators refused to cooperate or evade justice. For .2, the influence of the Gabby Petito case on domestic violence lost of the most significant outcomes of the Gabby Petito case was the national conversation about domestic violence and relationship abuse. Gabby's tragic death has spurred lawmakers and activists to call for changes to domestic violence laws, particularly those related to the response to missing persons and the protection of victims. The case highlighted the critical need for more effective support systems for people in abusive relationships and for better training for law enforcement to recognize the signs of abuse before it escalates into tragedy. For .2.1, calls for legal reforms. Gabby's case made it clear that the legal system must do more to protect victims of domestic violence and respond more swiftly to situations that show potential for harm. Domestic violence advocates have used the case to push for reforms to ensure that law enforcement takes reports of abuse and signs of potential danger more seriously. Some of the key legal reforms being called for include stronger protections for victims. Advocates argue for laws that provide more support for victims of domestic violence, including financial assistance, shelter, and legal counsel. These measures would help victims escape abusive situations before violence escalates. Mandatory reporting of abuse. Some advocates suggest that authorities should be required to follow up more rigorously on domestic abuse calls and not simply separate the involved parties, as was seen in Gabby and Brian's body cam footage. This would prevent the perpetrators from continuing their abusive behavior unchecked. More thorough investigations. The public response to the handling of Gabby's case has highlighted the need for immediate investigations when domestic violence or possible abuse is suspected. Gabby's case was treated as a missing persons case first, but many argue that her disappearance should have been treated with more urgency from the outset, especially given the signs of an abusive relationship. For .2.2, the role of the Petito family in advocacy. Gabby's parents, Nicole Schmidt and Joseph Petito, have become vocal advocates for domestic violence awareness since their daughter's death. The Petito family, devastated by the loss of their beloved daughter, has used their grief to fuel legislative change. Through their advocacy, they have called on lawmakers to pass stronger laws and create programs that can support victims of domestic violence. In 2022, the Gabby Petito Foundation was launched by the Petito family. The foundation's mission is to help support victims of domestic violence and assist with missing persons cases. The foundation also works to provide resources for families who are going through similar traumatic experiences. The Petito family's efforts to advocate for legislative change in Gabby's name have already resulted in discussions surrounding the prevention of domestic violence and improved victim support systems. The foundation has also played a significant role in raising public awareness of domestic violence and the signs that people should look out for in relationships that may be abusive. Through media appearances and the foundation's advocacy, Gabby's parents are continuing to honor their daughter's memory by working to protect other potential victims. For .3, Gabby Petito's case and the influence on public awareness. Gabby's case not only had an impact on legal and policy changes, but also dramatically increased public awareness of domestic violence, missing persons cases, and the relationship dynamics that can sometimes go unnoticed until it is too late. As the story unfolded, many people began to understand the warning signs of abusive relationships more clearly, and how easily these signs can be ignored or misunderstood. For .3.1, the national wake-up call. Gabby's case became a wake-up call for many people, both in the United States and around the world, regarding the dangerous patterns that can exist in romantic relationships. Many domestic violence survivors saw elements of their own experiences reflected in Gabby's story especially. The isolation, gaslighting, and manipulative behaviors often exhibited by abusers. The case also sparked broader discussions about the role of mental health in abusive relationships. Gabby had expressed that she struggled with anxiety and stress, which she discussed openly on social media and in the body cam footage. While it wasn't explicitly stated that these issues were exploited by Brian, many commentators have suggested that mental health challenges can exacerbate an already difficult situation in abusive relationships. For media coverage and the role of public attention. The media coverage of Gabby's case was extensive and played a central role in raising awareness about the issue of domestic violence. However, the case also drew attention to the media's tendency to focus on certain missing persons cases, especially those of young white women, while neglecting others. Gabby's case, which was reported widely across mainstream media and social media platforms, prompted a critical discussion about media bias and the disparities in the attention given to missing persons cases, particularly for people of color or marginalized groups. The widespread media attention also underscored the power of social media activism. Platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok allowed millions of people to share their support for Gabby's family, organize online campaigns, and demand justice. It was this digital wave of support that helped keep the case in the spotlight, ensuring that Gabby's story was not forgotten, even in the midst of the search for her and the ongoing investigation into Brian Laundrie, or IE.1. The dark side of media coverage. While media attention helped bring attention to Gabby's case, it also had a dark side. The massive amount of coverage and the public's obsession with the case led to media sensationalism and the spread of unverified information. Some outlets, especially on social media, became consumed with theories and conjectures that went beyond the facts. In the age of instant information, misinformation spread quickly, and in some instances, this misinformation added confusion to an already complex investigation. The pressure on law enforcement and the Petito family from constant media attention raised ethical concerns as well. While the media coverage was undoubtedly helpful in getting the case noticed, it also meant that the privacy of those involved was compromised, and in some cases, family members became targets of unwanted scrutiny. Moving forward, Gabby Petito's legacy. Gabby Petito's death has undoubtedly left an indelible mark on the criminal justice system, law enforcement protocols, and public awareness. While her case ended tragically, it has opened up important conversations about domestic violence, victim rights, and the role of social media in modern investigations. Gabby's family continues to fight for justice and raise awareness about the dangers of domestic abuse. Through the Gabby Petito Foundation, they have worked to turn their pain into a mission to protect others, ensuring that Gabby's legacy will live on in the form of lasting social change. Her case has prompted the legal system, lawmakers, and the general public to rethink how we treat victims of abusive relationships, how we handle missing persons cases, and how we provide support for those in need. Gabby Petito's story may have ended tragically, but her impact is far-reaching. The changes sparked by her case will continue to shape policies, influence public perceptions, and create a lasting legacy of awareness and justice for victims of domestic violence. Conclusion: apart for Gabby Petito's death was a catalyst for a much-needed societal and legal reckoning with domestic violence. Her case highlighted the failures in responding to potential warning signs of abuse and the urgent need for more effective protections for vulnerable individuals. Through advocacy, awareness, and legal reforms, her family is ensuring that her tragic story does not fade away. Gabby's legacy is not just one of sorrow, but of hope, change, and the continuing fight for justice. Part 5. The enduring legacy of Gabby Petito and the road ahead. 1. Gabby Petito's legacy, a call for systemic change. Gabby Petito's story was more than just a tragic headline. It was a catalyst for profound change in the conversation around domestic violence, missing persons cases, and public responsibility. While her death was a devastating blow to her family and friends, it also ignited a global movement, one that continues to inspire action, spread awareness, and demand reforms in how society addresses violence, abuse, and the protection of vulnerable individuals. Before her death, Gabby was a bright young woman filled with hopes and dreams of a life of adventure and exploration. Her social media presence reflected her love for the outdoors and her desire to inspire others. She used her platform to encourage others to follow their dreams, embrace new experiences, and live life to its fullest. Tragically, her journey ended far too soon, and her dream of a free-spirited life on the road was cut short by an act of violence that shocked the world. But Gabby's tragic story is now a symbol of resilience and hope. Through the efforts of her family, particularly her mother, Nicole Schmidt, and father, Joseph Petito, Gabby's death has sparked an ongoing conversation about the need for change in how we approach domestic violence, missing persons investigations, and law enforcement protocols. 5.2 The continued fight for justice and policy change. Gabby's parents have used their grief as fuel to fight for justice, not just for their daughter, but for others who suffer from the same fate. They become outspoken advocates for domestic violence awareness, victim protection, and support for families of missing persons. Through their foundation, the Gabby Petito Foundation, they continue to push for legislative changes that would provide more resources for victims and improve the investigation process in cases of domestic violence and missing persons. 5.2.1 Gabby Petito Foundation. Gabby Petito Foundation was launched to honor Gabby's memory and to provide support for victims of domestic violence and missing persons cases. The foundation's mission is simple yet profound: to ensure that no other family has to endure the same pain and uncertainty that the Petito family has faced. By raising awareness, providing resources, and supporting ongoing efforts to improve the handling of missing persons cases, the foundation hopes to make a lasting impact on the way the system handles domestic violence and its victims. The foundation also aims to offer financial support to families of missing persons, ensuring they have the resources they need to conduct independent investigations and bring attention to their loved ones' disappearances. Gabby's parents have been vocal about how difficult it is to navigate the system, especially when law enforcement may not prioritize certain cases or fail to take swift action. By honoring Gabby's memory, the foundation works tirelessly to create a more supportive and empathetic society that recognizes the signs of abuse and provides resources to those in need. Gabby's family is committed to ensuring that her death was not in vain, and that real change takes place. 5.2.2 Legislative action and advocacy for domestic violence reform. In the wake of Gabby's case, lawmakers and activists have rallied behind calls for stronger domestic violence laws and greater protections for victims. Gabby's death exposed significant gaps in how domestic violence cases are handled, especially when emotional and psychological abuse are involved. The lack of early intervention in Gabby's relationship with Brian Laundrie may have contributed to the tragic outcome, and many believe that if the warning signs of abuse had been addressed earlier, Gabby might still be alive today. As a result of Gabby's case, domestic violence reforms have gained traction in several states. Advocates have pushed for mandatory reporting for law enforcement when abuse is suspected, better training for officers on identifying domestic violence red flags, and more comprehensive support systems for victims who are trying to leave an abusive relationship. Gabby's case has sparked discussions on the importance of treating domestic violence as an urgent matter rather than a personal issue that can be brushed aside. Some of the key areas being targeted for reform include improved investigations. Domestic violence situations often escalate quickly, and the investigation process needs to prioritize the safety and well-being of the victim. Early intervention can save lives, and investigators need to act quickly when there are clear signs of violence or manipulation. Protection for victims. The legal system needs to provide stronger protections for victims of domestic violence. This includes offering temporary restraining orders, emergency shelters, and legal aid for those trying to leave abusive situations. Public education and awareness. Gabby's case has also underscored the need for more public education about the warning signs of domestic abuse. The general public needs to be more aware of how emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and controlling behavior can be just as harmful as physical violence. 5.3 The broader societal impact. Changing the narrative around domestic violence. Gabby's death also sparked a much-needed conversation about the societal impact of domestic violence and how it's often hidden behind closed doors. Before her case, many people were unaware of the subtle signs of abuse, especially when the victim is not physically harmed or when the abuse is psychological or emotional. Gabby's case put a spotlight on how domestic abuse can be insidious, involving manipulation, gaslighting, and control before escalating to physical violence. 5.3.1 Empowering survivors of domestic abuse. Gabby's death empowered many survivors of domestic violence to share their own stories and seek support. For years, victims of abuse have suffered in silence, often feeling isolated and powerless. Gabby's story showed survivors that they are not alone and that their voices matter. The hashtag Justice for Gabby movement provided a platform for those who have experienced abuse to speak out and share their experiences, helping to reduce the stigma surrounding domestic violence. Through her case, Gabby's story has given a voice to those who feel trapped and vulnerable. Many survivors have credited the public outcry surrounding Gabby's case as a pivotal moment in their own journey toward healing. The conversation about domestic violence prevention has expanded, and more resources are now available for those who need help. 5.3.2 A shift in public perception of domestic abuse. Gabby's case has also helped change the public perception of what constitutes domestic violence. Historically, there's been a tendency to focus only on physical violence, But Gabby's story revealed that psychological and emotional abuse are just as damaging. Her relationship with Brian Laundrie, as seen in the body cam footage, showed how controlling behavior and gaslighting can create an unhealthy and dangerous dynamic that often goes unnoticed until it's too late. By raising awareness about the complexities of domestic violence, Gabby's case has helped shift societal views on the importance of addressing the early stages of abuse. It has shown that no form of abuse should be tolerated and that victims need support as early as possible to escape toxic relationships before they escalate into something more dangerous. 5.4. Media coverage and the need for ethical reporting. Media coverage of Gabby's case played a significant role in keeping the case in the public eye, but it also highlighted several ethical challenges in how missing persons cases and domestic violence stories are reported. Gabby's case was one of the most heavily covered cases in 2021, sparking a broader conversation about how missing persons and domestic violence cases are portrayed by the media. 5.4.1. The criticism of media bias. While the intense media coverage of Gabby's case helped bring attention to domestic violence, it also brought criticism. Many people pointed out the disproportionate media coverage given to Gabby's case compared to missing persons cases involving people of color or marginalized communities. The public's fascination with the case highlighted the racial disparities in media coverage, and many activists called for greater attention to be paid to other victims who don't receive the same level of media focus. The case led to questions about why certain cases dominate the headlines while others are quickly forgotten. Advocates for racial justice and equity in the media have used Gabby's case to call for better reporting practices that cover missing persons cases across all demographics, not just those that fit a certain narrative. 5.4.2. Ethical reporting on domestic violence. Gabby's case also raised questions about how the media reports on domestic violence. It is crucial for the media to be sensitive when covering cases involving domestic abuse and mental health. Gabby's story was highly publicized, but it's important that such cases are reported with care, ensuring that victims aren't blamed or stigmatized. Ethical reporting should focus on supporting victims, shedding light on the complexities of abusive relationships, and advocating for legal reforms that prioritize victim protection. 5.5. The road ahead. Gabby Petito's legacy of changing. Gabby Petito's case will continue to shape the conversation around domestic violence, missing persons cases, and the protection of vulnerable individuals. Her tragic death is a powerful reminder that abusive relationships are often not as clear-cut as they seem, and that the signs of abuse can be subtle and overlooked. Her case serves as a call to action for both society and the legal system to act with more urgency in domestic violence cases, to provide better victim support, and to continue pushing for laws and reforms that protect people who are vulnerable to abuse. While Gabby's story is a heartbreaking one, her legacy continues to inspire change through the work of her family, the Gabby Petito Foundation, and the public's efforts to spread awareness. Gabby's voice continues to resonate. Gabby's death will not be forgotten, and her legacy will live on through the changes that continue to unfold in the fight for justice and victim empowerment. Call to action CTA for Room 57 if you found Gabby Petito's story moving and inspiring. Join us in advocating for change. Support the Gabby Petito Foundation and help raise awareness about domestic violence and missing persons cases. Share this video, comment your thoughts, and let's continue the conversation about how we can all help prevent tragedies like this from happening. Don't forget to subscribe to Room 57 for more in-depth analyses of high-profile cases, social justice issues, and stories that matter. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a video, and remember, your voice matters. Together, we can make a difference.